But the safety of the cave did not mean Zeus would remain hidden forever. As the years passed, the child grew stronger. The quiet mountains of Crete became his world. He learned the sounds of the wind, the rivers, and the creatures that moved through the forests. Above him, the stars appeared night after night, while far away, Cronus continued to rule the heavens. Rhea knew that the time would eventually come when Zeus would have to leave his hidden home. According to the ancient stories, Zeus was protected by those who cared for him. They kept his presence secret so that Cronus would never hear his cries. And there was another reason for the secrecy: the prophecy. Cronus had tried to prevent the prophecy by swallowing his children, but he had never realized that Rhea had saved the youngest one. Every day that Zeus grew older brought him closer to the moment when his father would finally discover the truth. Eventually, Zeus became a young and powerful god. He looked upon the mountains around him and understood that the world beyond the cave was waiting. There were brothers and sisters he had never known. There was a father who believed him dead, and there was an ancient kingdom ruled by fear. Zeus could have remained hidden, but the stories of mythology rarely allow their heroes to remain hidden forever. One day, Zeus left the mountains of Crete. He traveled beyond the quiet forests and toward the world ruled by Cronus. His journey was not yet a battle. There was no army behind him, no great palace welcomed him. He simply carried the knowledge of who he was. As Zeus traveled, the sky seemed to follow him. Clouds gathered above distant mountains, and the first signs of his connection with thunder and lightning began to appear. Yet Zeus was patient. He knew that strength alone would not be enough. To defeat Cronus, he would first need to free the brothers and sisters who had been swallowed years before. And so the young god prepared himself for the greatest challenge of his life. Somewhere beyond the mountains stood the palace of Cronus. Inside it lived the ruler who believed his throne was secure. He did not know that the child he had feared had survived. He did not know that Zeus was approaching, and he did not know that the old prophecy was beginning to come true. Zeus had finally left the quiet mountains of Crete. He was no longer the hidden child Rhea had protected. He was now a young god with a purpose. But before Zeus could challenge Cronus, he needed to understand the power of his father and the fate of the brothers and sisters who had disappeared long ago. For years, Cronus had ruled the heavens with fear. He had swallowed his children because he believed that one of them would eventually overthrow him. Yet Zeus knew the truth. His brothers and sisters were still alive, trapped within Cronus. The young god began searching for a way to free them. According to the ancient myths, Zeus eventually came to the palace of Cronus in disguise. He did not immediately reveal himself. Instead, he watched. He studied the movements of the palace and waited for the right moment. Cronus remained confident. He believed that the prophecy had been defeated. He believed there was no child left who could challenge him. But Zeus carried the secret that Cronus feared most. With the help of divine knowledge and a carefully prepared plan, Zeus found a way to make Cronus release the children he had swallowed. One by one, they returned. Hestia came first, then Demeter, then Hera, then Hades, and finally Poseidon. For the first time, the brothers and sisters stood together. They were no longer prisoners of Cronus. They were free. And among them stood Zeus, the youngest son who had survived. The reunited gods now faced a difficult choice. They could hide once again, or they could challenge the Titans and change the order of the world. Zeus chose the second path. He knew the coming conflict would not be small. Cronus had powerful allies. The Titans had ruled for generations, and their strength was enormous. But Zeus had something his father did not have. He had his brothers and sisters beside him. Together, they would prepare for war. The ancient world was about to enter a new age, and high above the mountains, the first thunder began to roll across the sky. Long before Zeus ruled from the heights of Mount Olympus, the world of the Greek gods was very different. There were no peaceful halls filled with Olympian gods, no great temples stood beneath the morning sun, and no thunderbolt yet crossed the heavens at the command of Zeus. Instead, the world was ruled by an older generation of powerful beings known as the Titans. Among them was Cronus, a mighty ruler who had taken power from his own father, Uranus. Cronus had become king of the heavens, and for a time it seemed that nothing could challenge his rule. But Cronus carried a secret fear. A prophecy had warned him that one day one of his own children would rise against him and take his throne. And so, when his children were born, Cronus made a terrible choice. One by one, he swallowed them. Hestia disappeared. Demeter disappeared. Hera disappeared. Hades disappeared, and Poseidon disappeared. Their mother, Rhea, watched in sorrow as each child was taken away. But when her final child was about to be born, Rhea could no longer accept what Cronus was doing. That child was Zeus. Rhea secretly traveled to the island of Crete, far from the palace of Cronus. There, among quiet mountains and ancient trees, she found a hidden cave. Inside that cave, Zeus was born. He was small and helpless, yet, according to the old myths, his future was already written. Rhea knew that if Cronus discovered him, Zeus would suffer the same fate as his brothers and sisters. So she hid him deep within the mountains. The cave became his first home. Outside, the world continued as usual. The seasons changed, rivers flowed through the valleys, the stars appeared each night above the mountains. But inside the quiet cave, a child was growing. And this child would one day change the entire order of the gods. For now, however, Zeus was simply a hidden child, protected from the eyes of his father. The ancient stories tell us that he was cared for by divine beings and surrounded by the natural beauty of Crete. He grew beneath the sound of wind moving through the trees, while the distant mountains watched over him. Far away, Cronus remained upon his throne, believing that his youngest child was gone. He did not know that Zeus was alive. He did not know that the prophecy had survived, and he certainly did not know that the child hidden in the mountains would eventually return, not as a helpless infant, but as the god who would challenge the Titans, claim the heavens, and become one of the most famous gods in all of Greek mythology. The first thunder was only the beginning. Zeus knew that the Titans would never surrender their power willingly. Cronus still sat upon his ancient throne, surrounded by the forces that had ruled the heavens for generations. So Zeus and his brothers and sisters began preparing for the great conflict. They needed allies. Deep within the ancient world were powerful beings who had once been imprisoned by the Titans. Zeus understood that their strength could change the balance of the coming war. He traveled to the places where these forgotten beings were held and released them from their chains. Among them were the Cyclopes, enormous one-eyed beings known for their incredible skill as craftsmen. When they saw Zeus, they recognized the young god as the one who had come to challenge Cronus. In gratitude, they offered him a gift unlike any weapon the world had seen before. They created the Thunderbolt. It became the symbol of Zeus's power. Poseidon received the mighty trident, and Hades received a mysterious helmet that could conceal its wearer from sight. Now the three brothers possessed powers that could challenge the Titans. But the war would still be difficult. The Titans controlled vast territories, and their strength was ancient. For 10 long years the two sides fought. Mountains shook, the heavens darkened, the seas became restless.
Yet the stories do not describe every battle in detail. Instead, they speak of a struggle so great that even the natural world seemed to tremble. Zeus stood at the center of the conflict. With his thunderbolt in hand, he became the leader of the younger gods. Every strike of lightning marked another step toward a new age, and slowly the power of the Titans began to weaken. The old rulers of the world were no longer unstoppable. Cronus finally understood the truth. The child he had feared had returned. The prophecy he had tried to escape had become reality, and the throne he had protected for so long was beginning to slip away. The final battle was approaching. When it came, the world would never be the same again.
The final struggle between the Titans and the younger gods had arrived. For 10 years, the ancient powers had fought across the heavens and the mountains. Neither side had been willing to surrender. But now, Zeus had gathered enough strength to change the course of the war. From the heights of Olympus, he looked across the vast landscape. The Titans stood on one side, the younger gods stood on the other. For a moment, everything was still. Then Zeus raised his hand. The sky darkened. Clouds gathered above the mountains, and a deep rumble moved across the heavens. In his hand appeared the weapon given to him by the Cyclopes, the thunderbolt. Zeus hurled it toward the battlefield. Lightning flashed across the sky. The mountains seemed to tremble beneath the sound. Poseidon raised his great trident, and the seas began to move. Hades disappeared beneath the shadow of his magical helmet, moving unseen through the chaos. The Titans fought with all their ancient strength, but the younger gods continued forward. The battle became so enormous that the old stories describe the earth and heavens themselves as shaking. Rocks fell from mountains, winds swept across the valleys, the sea rose against the shores, and above everything Zeus continued to command the storm. At last, the strength of the Titans began to fade. Cronus could no longer hold the power he once possessed. The throne that had seemed eternal was now within reach of his youngest son. Zeus had not defeated his father through strength alone. He had survived, he had waited, he had gathered allies, and he had united those who had once been separated. The Titans were finally defeated. Cronus and the older gods were removed from their positions of power and imprisoned in the deep regions of the ancient world. The great war was over. But Zeus and his brothers now faced another question. Who would rule the new world? The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, stood together and divided the realms among themselves. The heavens would belong to Zeus, the seas would belong to Poseidon, and the underworld would belong to Hades. The earth, however, would remain a shared realm. And so the age of the Titans came to an end. A new age had begun. At its center stood Zeus. The hidden child of Crete had become the ruler of the heavens. With the Titans defeated, Zeus and his brothers stood before a world that had changed forever. The old rulers were gone. The heavens were quiet once more. And from the heights of Olympus, Zeus began to establish a new order. He was no longer simply the youngest son of Cronus. He was now the ruler of the sky. His brother Poseidon became lord of the seas, while Hades took his place in the mysterious realm beneath the earth. Although the three brothers ruled different realms, the earth remained a place they shared. For Zeus, however, ruling the heavens meant more than sitting upon a throne. He became associated with thunder, lightning, rain, storms, and the great forces of the sky. When clouds gathered above the mountains, people imagined Zeus watching from beyond them. When thunder rolled across the valleys, they heard the voice of the new ruler of the gods. But Zeus understood that power alone could not keep the new world peaceful. The gods needed a home. So Mount Olympus became the center of their new kingdom. High above the earth, beyond ordinary human reach, the gods gathered in magnificent halls. There were great stone columns, open terraces, quiet gardens, and paths surrounded by olive trees. Here Zeus sat upon his throne. Beside him stood Hera. Around them gathered the other Olympian gods. Hestia brought warmth and the sacred fire. Demeter watched over the earth and its harvests. Athena represented wisdom and strategy. Apollo carried the light of music, prophecy, and healing. Artemis watched over the wilderness. Hermes traveled between gods and mortals, and many other divine figures would eventually become part of the stories of Olympus. For the first time, Zeus could look around and see the family that Cronus had once tried to destroy. His brothers were free, his sisters were free, and the old prophecy had been fulfilled. Yet Zeus's greatest challenges were not finished. The world below Olympus was filled with humans, heroes, kings, travelers, and ordinary families. They would pray to the gods, they would tell stories about them, and sometimes they would anger them. Zeus would become deeply involved in the lives of mortals. Sometimes he would appear as a protector, sometimes as a judge, and sometimes as a mysterious stranger whose true identity was revealed only after he had disappeared. The age of Zeus had begun, and with it came countless stories that would be remembered for thousands of years. After the age of the Titans ended, Zeus began to discover that ruling the heavens would not always be peaceful. The world was still wild. Ancient forces remained hidden beneath the earth, and some of the creatures born from the older generation of gods were powerful enough to challenge Olympus itself. Among the greatest of these beings were the giants. They were enormous, fierce, and connected to the ancient powers of the earth. When they rose against the Olympian gods, the new kingdom of Zeus was suddenly threatened. The gods gathered on Mount Olympus. Zeus stood at the center, looking toward the distant mountains where the giants were approaching. The sky grew dark. Clouds moved across the heavens. Thunder rolled over the valleys. But Zeus knew that this battle would require more than his own strength. The Olympian gods joined together. Athena prepared her shield. Apollo carried his light. Artemis stood ready with her bow. Poseidon raised his mighty trident, and Zeus lifted his thunderbolt toward the darkening sky. The battle began. Across the ancient landscape, the giants moved like mountains. The gods answered with their own divine powers. Lightning flashed, winds swept through the valleys, the earth trembled beneath their feet. For a long time, neither side seemed willing to give way, but the Olympians fought together, and slowly the threat against Mount Olympus began to disappear. Zeus once again stood victorious. Yet the battle taught him something important. Even the ruler of the heavens could not protect his kingdom alone. He needed his family. He needed the other gods, and he needed the balance between their different powers. After the conflict, Olympus became quiet once more. The gods returned to their halls. The mountains became peaceful, and Zeus looked down upon the earth. Below him, human life continued as it always had. People planted crops. Travelers crossed mountain roads. Kings ruled their cities, and families gathered around small fires at night. Zeus began to watch these humans with curiosity. Their lives were short compared with the lives of the gods, yet they had something the immortals sometimes lacked. They could change, they could learn, they could dream. And soon the stories of Zeus and humanity would become some of the most memorable myths of the ancient world. As Zeus watched humanity from the heights of Olympus, he began to notice how different mortals were from the gods. Their lives were short, their homes were simple, their days were filled with work, uncertainty, and hope. Yet they continued to build cities, tell stories, raise families, and look toward the heavens with wonder. Zeus became fascinated by them. According to the ancient myths, the gods sometimes walked among humans without revealing who they truly were. Zeus was especially known for doing this. He might appear as an ordinary traveler, an old man, or a mysterious stranger. He would visit villages and homes, observing how people treated one another. Sometimes he found kindness, sometimes he found greed, and sometimes he discovered that the simplest people could possess the greatest generosity. One famous tradition told of Zeus and Hermes traveling together in disguise. They came to a land where many people refused to welcome them. Door after door remained closed, but eventually they reached the humble home of an elderly couple. Their house was small, their belongings were few, yet when the strangers appeared at their door, the couple welcomed them inside. They offered what little food and drink they had. They gave without asking for anything in return. Zeus noticed. The old couple did not know that their guests were gods. They simply believed that every traveler deserved kindness. And for Zeus, that kindness mattered more than wealth or power. The story became a reminder of something the ancient Greeks believed deeply. A person's character could be revealed by how they treated a stranger. Zeus was often associated with hospitality and the protection of guests. To welcome someone into your home was not merely a social custom, it could be considered a sacred responsibility. And to violate that responsibility was to risk angering the gods. For Zeus, power was not only about thunder and lightning, it was also about justice. He watched kings and travelers, he watched the rich and the poor, and he watched those who had the power to help others but chose not to. The ruler of Olympus was beginning to become something more than a storm god. He became, in the imagination of ancient storytellers, a guardian of order. And as the centuries passed, more stories would grow around his name. Stories of heroes, stories of kings, stories of love, jealousy, wisdom, punishment, and forgiveness. And every story added another layer to the complicated character of Zeus. As the stories of Zeus grew, so did the stories of Mount Olympus. The great mountain became more than a home for the gods. It became the center of a divine family, filled with different personalities, powers, and rivalries. At the center of them all sat Zeus. His throne stood high above the earth, surrounded by the gods who had helped create the new order. But ruling a divine family was not always simple. The gods often disagreed. They had different desires, different responsibilities, and sometimes very different ideas about what was right. Zeus had to keep them together. Among the most important figures beside him was Hera. Hera was not simply the wife of Zeus. She was a powerful goddess in her own right, associated with marriage, queenship, and family. Together, Zeus and Hera became the royal pair of Olympus. Their relationship, however, was far from peaceful in many ancient stories. Zeus was often portrayed as restless and attracted to other gods and mortals. Hera was frequently angry about his actions. Their arguments became part of the mythology surrounding Olympus. Yet despite their conflicts, both remained central figures in the divine order. The other gods also had their own roles. Athena represented wisdom and strategic thought. Apollo was connected with music, prophecy, healing, and light. Artemis watched over the wilderness and hunting. Hermes carried messages between the gods and the mortal world. Poseidon ruled the seas. Hades governed the underworld. Each god had a different domain, and Zeus stood above them as the ruler who helped maintain the balance. Sometimes he settled disputes between the gods. Sometimes he punished those who broke sacred rules. And sometimes he simply watched as the complicated lives of gods and humans unfolded below Olympus. The stories did not present Zeus as a perfect ruler. He could be wise, generous, proud, impatient, or jealous. That complexity is one reason his myths survived for so long. Zeus was not portrayed as distant from the emotions of the world. He experienced many of the same feelings as the beings he ruled. But unlike mortals, Zeus had eternity before him, and the choices he made could affect gods, heroes, cities, and entire generations. From his throne on Olympus, Zeus continued to watch the world, and soon some of the greatest heroes of Greek mythology would enter his story.
Among the many heroes connected with Zeus, one of the most famous was Heracles. His story began with Zeus himself. The ancient myths tell us that Zeus saw the mortal woman Alcmene and became the father of a child who would one day become one of Greece's greatest heroes. That child was Heracles. From the beginning, his life was difficult. He possessed extraordinary strength, but strength did not protect him from suffering. As Heracles grew older, he became known for his courage and determination. He faced monsters, dangerous journeys, and impossible tasks. Yet behind his story stood Zeus, watching the life of his son unfold. The relationship between gods and heroes was complicated. The gods could offer guidance, protection, or sometimes obstacles. They could change the course of a human life with a single decision. But heroes still had to face their own struggles. Heracles became famous because he continued forward even when the path seemed impossible. His greatest challenges eventually became known as the 12 labors. He fought the Nemean lion. He faced the Hydra. He captured the great Cyrenian hind. He entered places where ordinary humans would never dare to go. Each task became another chapter in his legend. And through these stories, Zeus became connected not only with the heavens, but with the world of heroes. Heracles was not the only hero connected to Zeus. The myths are filled with kings, warriors, travelers, and founders whose stories touched the world of Olympus. Sometimes Zeus helped them, sometimes he tested them, and sometimes his decisions created problems that heroes had to solve themselves. This was one of the strange qualities of Greek mythology. The gods were powerful, but the stories were often about the choices of individuals. A hero could be brave and still make mistakes. A king could be powerful and still lose everything. And even the gods themselves could not escape the consequences of their choices. As the generations passed, Zeus remained on his throne. The heroes came and went, kingdoms rose and disappeared, cities were built, destroyed, and rebuilt. But Mount Olympus remained above the changing world. And from that eternal mountain, Zeus continued to watch the stories of gods and mortals unfold.
As the years passed, Zeus became more deeply connected with the lives of both gods and mortals. From his throne on Mount Olympus, he could see kingdoms rise and fall beneath the clouds. But among all the stories surrounding Zeus, some of the most memorable were those involving the great heroes of Greece. One of them was Perseus. Perseus was born to Danae, a mortal woman whose life had been changed by a prophecy. The story says that Zeus came to her in a mysterious form, and from their union, Perseus was born. His childhood was not easy, yet Perseus eventually became a brave and determined young man. His greatest challenge came when he was asked to bring back the head of Medusa. Medusa was a terrifying creature whose gaze, according to the myth, could turn a person to stone. Perseus could not defeat such a creature through ordinary strength. He needed wisdom and divine assistance. The gods helped him. Athena gave him guidance. Hermes provided him with important tools, and Perseus learned to approach Medusa without looking directly at her. He watched her reflection in a polished shield. Slowly, carefully, he moved toward her, and when the moment came, he struck. Perseus returned victorious. His journey became one of the great heroic stories of Greek mythology. And once again, Zeus's name was connected to the life of a mortal hero. These stories reveal something interesting about the ancient Greek view of the gods. The gods were powerful, but they did not always solve every problem themselves. Instead, they often gave humans the tools, knowledge, or opportunity to face their own challenges. The hero still had to make the choice. The hero still had to take the risk. And the hero still had to continue when the path became difficult. Zeus remained above them all, watching from Olympus. His world was filled with immortals, while below him lived generations of short-lived humans. Yet their stories were connected. The gods influenced the world of mortals, and mortals, through their courage and choices, became the heroes whose names would survive for thousands of years. Another generation of heroes would soon enter the stories of Zeus. One of the most famous was Theseus. Theseus was known as a brave young hero who would eventually travel to Athens and become one of its legendary kings. But before that, he faced a dangerous journey. Along the road, he encountered bandits and criminals who believed they could control the travelers passing through their lands. Theseus refused to be frightened. One by one, he confronted them. His journey became a test of courage, patience, and strength. Eventually, Theseus reached Athens. There, his life became connected with another famous story, the Minotaur. Deep inside the great palace of Knossos on Crete was said to be a vast maze known as the Labyrinth. Within it lived the Minotaur, a mysterious creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull. Athens was forced to send young people into the labyrinth as a terrible tribute. Theseus decided to end the tradition. He entered the maze carrying only his courage and a simple plan. Ariadne helped him by giving him a thread, allowing him to find his way back after entering the twisting passages. Deep inside the labyrinth, Theseus finally found the Minotaur. The battle was difficult, but Theseus survived. He followed the thread back through the maze and escaped. His victory became one of the most famous heroic tales of ancient Greece. And although Zeus was not at the center of every moment of Theseus' story, the hero lived within the world that Zeus and the Olympians ruled. That was how Greek mythology often worked. The stories of different gods and heroes overlapped. A god might appear briefly in one tale and become central to another. A hero could begin as an ordinary mortal and eventually become remembered for generations. And above these changing stories stood Mount Olympus. Zeus remained there, watching the world below. The centuries would pass. New heroes would appear. Old kingdoms would disappear. But the stories of Olympus would continue to grow. And among all the gods, Zeus would remain the figure most closely associated with the sky, thunder, kingship, and the mysterious power of fate. As the stories of heroes continued, Zeus remained the great ruler of the heavens. But his role was not limited to watching from Mount Olympus. The ancient Greeks believed that Zeus could influence the weather, protect travelers, witness promises and punish those who broke sacred laws. His thunderbolt became a symbol of his authority. When storms crossed the mountains, people imagined the power of Zeus moving through the sky. Yet Zeus was also connected with something quieter than thunder. He was associated with hospitality. In the ancient world, travelers often depended on strangers for food, shelter, and protection. A person who welcomed a guest was showing respect for the gods. A person who treated a helpless traveler with cruelty could be seen as breaking a sacred rule. This idea appears in several myths. One of the most peaceful stories tells of an old couple who lived in a humble home. Their possessions were simple, their food was limited. But when two strangers arrived at their door, the couple welcomed them without hesitation. They offered them a meal. They gave them a place to rest. They did not know that their guests were actually divine visitors. The strangers were Zeus and Hermes. The gods had been traveling among mortals to see how people treated those who needed help. Many doors had been closed to them, but this poor couple had opened theirs. Zeus remembered their kindness. The story became a lesson passed from generation to generation. It suggested that wealth was not what made a person honorable. A person could have very little and still possess great generosity. And someone with great wealth could still behave without kindness. For Zeus, the treatment of strangers revealed something important about the human heart. The story also reflected an ancient belief that the gods might be watching even when people could not see them. A simple act of kindness could matter. A small decision could become part of a much larger story. And perhaps that was one reason Zeus remained such a powerful figure in Greek mythology. He was not only the god of thunder. He represented the mysterious forces that stood behind justice, hospitality, promises, and the uncertain fate of human life.
But Zeus was not always gentle. The ancient myths also remembered him as a powerful judge. When kings became cruel, when people broke sacred promises, or when someone abused the trust of another person, Zeus could become a symbol of divine punishment. One story tells of a king named Lycaon. Lycaon was proud of his power and wanted to discover whether Zeus was truly a god. Instead of showing respect to his guest, he decided to test him. He prepared a terrible meal and served it to Zeus, believing that the god would not recognize what he had done. But Zeus knew. The test had revealed something much darker than Lycaon expected. The king had treated hospitality as a game and believed that his position made him beyond judgment. Zeus was angered by his arrogance. The ancient story says that Lycaon was transformed into a wolf. Whether taken literally or symbolically, the myth carried a clear message. Power did not make someone above the laws of the gods. A king could command people, a ruler could possess wealth, but neither could escape the consequences of cruelty and disrespect. This idea appears again and again in Greek mythology. The gods could be unpredictable, but certain principles remained important. Respect the gods, honor your promises, welcome the stranger. Do not allow pride to become greater than wisdom, and remember that human power is temporary. Zeus himself represented the highest authority in these stories. Yet even he was not completely free from the forces of fate. The Greeks believed that destiny was an ancient power that even the gods had to respect. This made Zeus a fascinating figure. He was the ruler of Olympus, but he was still part of a universe whose rules were older than his throne.
He could control storms. He could influence kings. He could help heroes. But the mysterious path of fate continued beyond even the reach of Olympus. And perhaps that was why the ancient stories never made Zeus completely simple. He was powerful, but not all-powerful. He was wise, but sometimes made mistakes. He could protect humanity, yet he could also punish it. And above all, he remained a god surrounded by mystery, a figure whose thunder could be heard across the mountains, while the deeper meaning of his stories continued to change with every generation. As the centuries passed, the image of Zeus became larger than any single myth. He was the ruler of the sky, the keeper of the thunderbolt, and the king of Mount Olympus. But to the ancient Greeks, Zeus could represent many things at once. He could be the storm that crossed the mountains. He could be the rain that returned to the fields. He could be the stranger standing quietly at a doorway. And he could be the unseen witness to a promise. His most famous symbol was the lightning bolt. The Cyclopes had created it for him during the Great War against the Titans. It was more than a weapon. It represented the authority of Zeus. When Zeus raised it, the heavens seemed to answer. Thunder rolled across the valleys. Clouds gathered above the mountains, and lightning illuminated the darkness for a brief moment. But Zeus also carried another important symbol, the eagle. The eagle was considered a powerful creature of the sky, able to rise above mountains and see across enormous distances. For this reason, it became closely connected with Zeus. In many artistic representations, an eagle appears beside his throne or flies above him. Another symbol associated with Zeus was the oak tree. The ancient Greeks considered certain oak trees sacred to him. The rustling leaves, the enormous branches, and the great age of the trees made them seem like natural temples. People could stand beneath those branches and feel very small. Perhaps that was part of the meaning. Zeus was associated with forces much greater than human beings. The sky stretched beyond sight. Thunder could shake an entire valley. Mountains could stand for thousands of years. And an ancient oak could outlive many generations. These symbols helped people imagine the power of a god who ruled the heavens. Yet Zeus was not only remembered through symbols, he was also remembered through stories. Parents told his myths to children. Poets sang about his adventures. Artists painted him on pottery and carved his image into stone. And travelers carried his stories from one city to another. With every retelling, the image of Zeus became a little more complex. Sometimes he appeared wise, sometimes powerful, sometimes generous, sometimes unpredictable. But he always remained unmistakable, the thunder god, the ruler of Olympus, and the immortal figure who stood at the center of one of the world's most enduring mythological traditions.
As night settled over the ancient world, the temples of Zeus became quiet. The fires burned low, the voices of worshippers faded, and above the mountains the stars slowly appeared. For the people who believed in Zeus, the night sky was never completely empty. Somewhere beyond the clouds was the home of the gods. Mount Olympus stood above the world, hidden among the peaks, and there Zeus remained upon his throne. But the stories of Zeus were never only about power. They were also about the relationship between gods and humans. People prayed to Zeus before important journeys. They asked for protection during storms. They made promises in his name. Kings sought his favor. Travelers hoped for his protection. Farmers looked toward the sky and waited for rain.
In this way, Zeus became part of ordinary life. His presence could be imagined in something as simple as a cloud gathering over a field, or the sound of distant thunder, or the sudden flash of lightning across a dark night. The ancient Greeks did not have modern explanations for these natural events. Instead, they created stories that gave the world meaning. Thunder became the voice of Zeus. Rain could become a blessing from the heavens. A storm could be a warning, and clear skies could feel like a sign of divine favor. Over time, different cities developed their own traditions about Zeus. Some honored him as a protector. Others remembered him as a god of justice. Some celebrated him through great festivals and athletic competitions. One of the most famous celebrations was held at Olympia. There, people gathered from different parts of the Greek world. They competed, prayed, celebrated, and honored the gods. Zeus stood at the center of the sacred traditions of Olympia. His name became connected with strength, order, and the greatness of the Greek world. Yet even as temples were built and festivals continued, the stories themselves remained simple enough to be told beside a fire. A child could hear the story of Zeus hiding in Crete. A traveler could remember the tale of his battle with the Titans. A poet could sing about his thunderbolt, and an old storyteller could describe the great halls of Mount Olympus. That is why the myths survived. They were not locked inside temples. They lived in people's memories, and every generation found something new in them.
Long after the great battles of the Titans and the rise of Mount Olympus, Zeus remained at the center of the Greek mythological world. Generations of heroes had come and gone. Kings had built their cities. Travelers had crossed distant lands, and countless stories had been told beneath the evening sky. Yet Zeus remained. His throne on Mount Olympus represented a world that seemed eternal. But even the gods were not untouched by change. The ancient Greeks understood that everything in the mortal world eventually changed. Kingdoms disappeared, temples became ruins, names were forgotten. Even the strongest heroes eventually became stories. The gods, however, were imagined as beings who existed beyond ordinary human time. Zeus continued to watch over the heavens. The storms continued to move across the mountains. The eagle continued to soar above the valleys, and the great oak trees continued to grow beneath the sky. But perhaps the most important part of Zeus's story was not what happened after his victory. It was what his journey represented. He began as a hidden child. His father believed him gone. He had no army, no throne, no kingdom. Yet he survived. He grew. He returned. And he changed the entire order of the divine world. The story of Zeus was therefore also a story about transformation. A child became a ruler. A hidden god became the king of Olympus, and a frightened world entered a new age. Still, Zeus was never portrayed as perfect. The myths allowed him to make mistakes. He could be proud, he could be jealous, he could be generous, he could be unpredictable, and sometimes his decisions created problems that others had to solve. That complexity made him feel strangely familiar. Although Zeus was immortal, the emotions found in his stories were deeply human. Love, anger, fear, pride, hope, and the desire to protect the people and world around him. Perhaps that is why his name survived for so many centuries. The ancient Greeks were not simply telling stories about a distant god. They were telling stories about power, family, choices, and the mysterious forces that shape a life. And tonight, as we return once more to the quiet image of Mount Olympus, the thunder has finally become distant. The sky is calm, the mountains are silent,
and Zeus remains beneath the stars, watching over a world filled with stories.
And so, the story of Zeus slowly comes to an end. The great battles are over. The Titans have fallen. The Olympians have found their place. And Mount Olympus has become a quiet home above the clouds. Zeus remains upon his throne, looking across the world he once fought to protect. Below him, the mountains are silent. The rivers continue their endless journey towards the sea. Olive trees move gently in the evening wind. And far above, the stars shine across the dark sky. There is no great battle tonight. No thunder shakes the heavens. No army marches towards Olympus. There is only silence. Perhaps this is the final lesson hidden within the old myths. Even the greatest stories eventually become quiet. Zeus began his journey as a child hidden inside a mountain cave. He grew into a god. He challenged his father. He fought the Titans. He freed his family. He became ruler of the heavens. And for countless generations, people continued to speak his name. But the world around him kept changing. Civilizations rose. Civilizations disappeared. The temples that once stood proudly beneath the sun eventually became ancient ruins. The people who once prayed to Zeus eventually became part of history. Yet the stories remained. They survived in poems. They survived in paintings. They survived in old stones and broken statues. And they survived in the imagination of people who still look towards the night sky. Perhaps somewhere in that quiet sky, we can still imagine the old stories. A great mountain hidden among clouds. A distant throne. An eagle resting beside it. And Zeus looking peacefully across the world below. The thunderbolt rests at his side. His long journey is finally still. The gods are quiet. The mountains are quiet. And the night becomes deeper. So, as we leave Mount Olympus behind, there is nothing more to fear. The storm has passed. The sky is calm. And the ancient story of Zeus can rest beneath the stars. Good night, and let the quiet world of mythology slowly fade into your dreams.